If you have a smart speaker, you have access to the entire world of NPR and St. Louis Public Radio. All the latest news and all the captivating stories. Activate our voices with yours by telling your smart speaker to play St. Louis Public Radio.
For more than a decade, Stephen Webber and I maneuvered through the often chaotic world of Missouri politics. He had the perspective of a state legislator and party leader, while I observed changes as a reporter. On the latest episode of Politically Speaking that was recorded at a park in Columbia, Missouri, Webber and I discussed where Missouri politics and journalism have been and what the future holds. Let's hit the music.
This is the Politically Speaking podcast, the definitive show about Missouri politics.
We have to talk about things that matter to people.
I've tried to bring that same aggressive iconoclast style with me to the United States Senate.
I think my district is a model for the state.
We put Missourians first.
You just kind of have to find the common ground with people.
I believe that this district deserves someone who represents their values.
After I came back to St. Louis, I started thinking that I could have a bigger role on the change that I wanted to make.
Welcome to the Politically Speaking podcast. This is not Jason Rosenbaum. My name is Stephen Webber. I'm the former chair of the Missouri Democratic Party and the current political director for the Missouri AFL-CIO. And today we are flipping the script. Instead of answering questions, I will be asking questions. And the man I have here to answer the questions is a legend in his prime. He's the former karaoke champion of the East Side Tavern. His number one seeded Bucks are hanging on. He's a veteran of over 400 Politically Speaking podcasts.
500.
Over 500 Politically Speaking podcasts. The future dean of the Missouri Press Corps, Jason Rosenbaum. Jason, thank you for joining the Politically Speaking podcast.
Well, this is a little outside my comfort zone because I've been told to never give the microphone over to a stakeholder, but you know, it's okay to try something once.
Well, and this is the first time I've ever hosted a podcast, so this is a change for both of us.
I may wrestle the microphone away from you near the end of the show, but we'll see how that works out.
Fair enough. Well, we talked about doing this a while back, and partly was you and I have come into politics at roughly the same time. Mm-hmm. We've seen a lot of similar things, and you're always bringing other people's perspectives into politics and into reporting to the public. And I thought it'd be cool to get sort of your perspective on what you've seen over the last decade and a half in Missouri politics.
Yeah, and I really care a lot about the future of Missouri political journalism, and I do have some thoughts about where it's been and where it's going.
No, I appreciate it. Well, let's sort of get into it here. So you started actually at the Tribune as an intern in 2005. You were hired in 2006.
I really got to know you in 2008 when you ran for state rep, and I continued to talk with you even after I left the Columbia Tribune in 2008. So that we've known each other for quite a long time.
We have. So starting there in the 2008 cycle, when I came back, I was running for the state house. You were running the Columbia Daily Tribune political blog.
I was.
And that was a big thing in Missouri politics. It was a very innovative thing. You were not just posting, reports about what was going on, but you were linking to when campaigns put up ads. You were linking to the ads, which I know it sounds, sort of trite now, but back in 2007, 2008, that was a big deal. You were showing up with your camera and recording candidates, putting video of candidates. That was really cutting edge stuff. How did that come together? Where did you get the vision for that?
Well, I can't say I was the first person to come up with that idea. I often credit Antonio French with really being the true innovator of that. He had a site called pubdef.net that was trying to chronicle the St. Louis political scene through video. Mm-hmm. And I think that was highly influential to me because I didn't really see a lot of mainstream reporters doing that. He was kind of a reporter, but he was also kind of a behind-the-scenes person before he ran. I also in college, I had done my capstone project on how to make political journalism, especially in Missouri, and also state house coverage more accessible to the digital age. And the main thing behind it was doing a blog. I just really had a vision of trying to supplement my written coverage with video and audio to make sure that what I was reporting was more authoritative. And I also just thought that it was just a different way to document what was going on in Missouri at the time.
So one of the more famous videos when Missouri politics viral was the 2008 former 9th Congressional District primary. So to set the stage, Matt Blunt announces he's not running for governor. Sarah Steelman and Kenny Holshoff, who's representing the 9th Congressional District, jumps in the race, sets off a wild primary for the 9th Congressional District, and one of the candidates was former Mizzou football star named Brock Olivo.
So the backstory is I had heard that from others he was going to enter the race, and I decided to drive down to Hermann, Missouri for the Gasconade County Lincoln Days. Chris Blank of the Associated Press was also there with me. And me and Chris Blank did a gaggle with him, and a gaggle is kind of press speak for when reporters gather around a politician and ask them questions. And I had my camera, to do this. And Chris and I were asking Brock very basic questions like, why are you running? What are going to be some issues that you're going to focus on? Like, what type of a Republican are you going to be? Because back then, there were more moderate Republicans, and then there were like really socially conservative.
There were sort of different lanes. There was like, are you a libertarian Republican? Yep. Are you an evangelical? Are you a business corp, type? Yeah, that was sort of the gist of your question.
And his answers to these really basic questions were really startling because he couldn't answer them. And when I put the video up on the blog, and I think I did it pretty late at night, people started to take notice to the point where it was going viral so much that, I think national news shows were talking about
it. The pull quote that he said I'm a Republican for now.
No, the pull quote was, look, most people know me as a football player, but I was also in social studies class. He also talked about how he believes in hard work, he believes in values, and his platform will surface in due time. I do want to just really stress that Brock Olivo is a really nice person. He did not take his flaming out after that personally against me, and he treated me with a lot of respect after that. And I've tried on social media to also openly root for him because he was an assistant coach in the NFL, and he also did a lot of things in Italy during COVID that talking about how to pass time that I thought were really inspirational and good for people. He was not going to work as a political candidate, but I know that was a big moment in my past career, but I always want to just emphasize that he's not one of the villains of Missouri politics.
No, I think you've always been good about that. And sort of the thing that's interesting to me about it is that it was an incredibly fair question. It was not a gotcha question.
No.
If that's 2 or 3 years earlier, and you see that quote in writing, and it's not him sort of stammering around trying to say it, do you think that changes things, or do you think the fact that it was on video changed the way that was digested by the public?
I think the fact that it was on video made it more viral. I think that there's something about watching somebody say something, being able to see their body language, seeing kind of how they're moving around. That's a lot different than seeing it on a written word. It's kind of the same reason why I really like being in radio right now, because it's a lot different to read somebody say something and then compare that to how you would hear somebody in a radio piece. It's a completely different experience. So I would have to say that definitely the fact that it was on video made a huge difference.
So there's a terrible video of me that you recorded.
Yes.
The first time, and I almost got Brock Olivo'd. I almost didn't know what to say.
I think I've actually watched this video recently, but tell me exactly what you're saying.
I was hoping it wasn't up anymore. Well, so when I was first running for the House, I was just an announced candidate. I came into the Missouri Capitol just to kind of, meet some legislators, introduce myself. I think it was the first time I met Judy Baker. Mm-hmm. I was running to replace Jeff Harris, who I knew, but I just met some people in the Capitol, and I stopped by the press room and just introduced myself. And we had talked on the phone already, but I just said hi, and you asked if you could do a quick video, and which I should have been ready for, but I wasn't. So of course I said yes. And I sat down, and I remember 2 things from it. I remember you asked me how I felt about somatocell nuclear transfer.
Yes.
Which I had never heard of, but is more commonly known as stem cell research, which I was very familiar with. And so I was trying to judge from context. I was like, I think that means stem cell research, but I'm not sure. So that was terrifying. And then I remember the very first comment that I ever got on anything I'd done politically was somebody, you put it up and somebody responded, "That looks like a hostage video." And that was the first comment anybody had on me in Missouri politics. And they were right. It did look like a hostage
we talked
video.
about in 2015 when you were on the podcast that my first question to you over the phone was, are you really serious about this? Because I thought that a 24-year-old running for the state rep seat was kind of like a novelty.
Well, that was just funny because I sent out this press release and I'm like feeling sick. I'm laying on the floor, literally laying on the floor, feeling sick. And I get a call from a reporter, and the first question is, "Are you serious?" And I was like, "Oh my God, everybody's gonna laugh at me."
Well,
but it worked out.
It worked out fine.
And I don't think that was even the first question. So, are you cognizant when you have a video or when you're putting a quote or putting together a story? Are you cognizant of how that's going to the impact that's going to have on the subject and on the issue while you're doing it? There's some things that when you put up, like, it's just going to be, you're going to set off a firestorm.
It depends on the thing. Like, I think that there are some times you talk with people and you know that it's a controversial person or it's a controversial topic, so you know whatever happens is going to cause a firestorm. I'll tell you this, and I guess it's okay for me to admit this now. When I did my interview with Senator McCaskill a few weeks ago, I thought that most of the people angry about it would be the Republicans that she criticized. And I got no feedback whatsoever from any Republicans. It was all from Democrats who were super upset with her talking about the limitations of Missouri Democratic politics right now and the fact that the conservative Democrats are not part of the coalition. That's going to make it a lot more difficult for them to win elections. Like, I was not expecting that, and maybe you were, because you kind of went through that yourself when you were with the Missouri Democratic Party. But sometimes, like, there's a firestorm that you kind of don't expect.
I wasn't surprised, but to me the main takeaway from that interview, which I was surprised that nobody else picked up on, was the sense that she didn't initially want to run in 2018, and she did it out of sense of duty and purpose. Yeah. Which I thought was which I personally knew and was aware of, and made a lot of the criticisms.
She also kind of wanted Candor to run in 2018 instead of her.
Well, and I sort of knew all that backstory, and so going through that cycle with people, complaining, it was always frustrating. So sometimes the story of the day is obvious, right? Sometimes it's what the legislature's doing, or a candidate announces, or a candidate drops out, or the governor gets arrested, whatever. That's obviously going to be the story. But sometimes it's not as obvious. So, for example, you went to Pike County a couple years ago and did a whole thing about talking to rural Democrats. So in a situation where it's not an obvious story of the day, but it's sort of a deeper story about Missouri politics, how do you decide which one of those to pursue and how to go about approaching that?
Well, it's not a secret to anybody that listens to this show that I have a real affinity for Northeast Missouri politics. It stems back from the fact that some of the first elections I covered as a student journalist for the Columbia Missourian, and then later in the 2006 election cycle, were some of the House districts that included parts of Columbia but also included parts of either Central or Northeast Missouri. So that's like the Steve Hobbs district, and then the Paul Quinn West Shoemire district, and then the West Shoemire Senate district. So having covered those races and having seen Democrats win those races, and then to see after 2012 that Democrats have lost everything, I think like in 2017 was a good way of asking why and like what were some of the factors that went into this. Because I think we've gone back and forth about this before. I was really sick of hearing it was just gerrymandering. Because I don't think it was gerrymandering that was a sole reason. I don't think it was not a reason. But I think that there were greater forces at play that I think needed to be explained. Right. And I think that particular concept of Northeast Missouri could really explain why the rest of rural Missouri went so Republican. I don't think it really changes whether you go to Southeast Missouri or Mid-Missouri. It all has to do with, I think, this connection between people's perception of the National Democratic Party and their inability to de-link it with local or state parties. So I think that one of your frustrations was when you were especially Missouri Democratic Party chair, was trying to resurrect this coalition that included more conservative Democrats, and you got a lot of pushback from more liberal Democrats. And I was trying to figure out like would that even be possible? And even if you could try to appeal to more conservative Democrats, would that even work? And I'm not really sure the answer is yes to that. And I'm sure you have a lot more thoughts about that than me. So.
Well, I agree with you in the sense of I don't think the answer to that is yes. Like, I don't think it's simply a matter of just running the same candidates that we ran pre-2010 and they would win today. I do think that one basic way to divide Missouri politics are people that saw Missouri politics before 2010 or certainly 2012 and those that have only known it afterwards. And I know that there were a dozen, I mean, not just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There was many rural Democrats when I came into politics.
Right.
And so I know and I reject the idea that that people in rural Missouri will not vote for a Democrat because it was only a few years ago that they were
and
doing it.
And they had diverse views.
Frequently.
Like, there was a big difference between someone like Tom Shively or Paul Quinn and someone like Wes Schumeyer or Rebecca McClanahan. I mean, right. Rebecca McClanahan was openly supportive of abortion rights. Paul Quinn and Tom Shively were always very opposed to abortion rights, but they were also very pro-union. They were pro-Medicaid expansion. And I think that they were anti, quote unquote corporate farming, so that they were finding ways to distinguish themselves from Republicans while agreeing with them on some issues. So I just firmly believe that Missouri Democrats are never going to be a majority party again unless they find a way to bring rural Missouri back into the fold. And I know that that is a topic that a lot of St. Louis and Kansas City Democrats just don't really want to broach with a lot of seriousness, but it's a numbers game, and I think that sometimes math trumps your feelings. And so that's kind of one of the reasons I did that type of story, for example.
And one just to add one thing, it's more than just 1 or 2 issues. I mean, Terry Swinger down in the Boot Heel was never a big union supporter. He didn't ever want to vote on issues that obviously are dear to me with stopping right to work. But I thought even if he wasn't there for us on a couple issues like that, he was still a lot better than having, from my perspective, having his replacement or having somebody who votes against us all the time. So it's not just 1 or 2 issues. It's like that for a lot of things.
Yeah.
Okay, so I referred to you as the sort of the future dean of the Missouri Press Corps, and like I said, we're both in our 30s, but with term limits, we've been around longer than a significant portion of the Missouri sort of political ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think that if you continue doing this, I think at some point you're going to be the guy that's been around longer than anybody else, that remembers races that other people don't remember or didn't pay attention to. How, with longevity and time and going through multiple cycles, has that sort of changed the arc in which you cover a story? Are you less concerned about the day-to-day? You still cover it, but do you see it in greater context? Is that am I completely making something up there?
No, and I mentioned this in the McCaskill interview. I think it's a bad thing that someone with 15 years of experience is considered the dean of Missouri political journalism. Because when I started, I was working with Terry Gainey at the Columbia Tribune, and he had already worked for 20 or 30 years. As everyone knows, Joe Manis and I worked together for about 8 or 9 years, and she has a wealth of experience. And then there were all the people that were kind of around me, like Bob Priddy, Virginia Young, Bob Watson. David Lieb, I think, is the dean right now, but he also covers a lot of national politics for the Associated Press. I think that this is a bad thing, but I think that it's also kind of a commentary on how Missouri political journalism can be very transitory. People can come in and stay for a few years, and then they sometimes either decide that journalism isn't for them or they go somewhere else. Chad Livengood is a great example. He was probably one of the best state house and political journalists that I've seen in the last 15 years. He worked for the Springfield News Leader, and then he went on to do really great things in Delaware and Michigan. I do think that having some memory of things before 2016, for example, does have its benefits. I think, though, you have to be more than just that. Like, you have to do more than just be like, well, back in my day, like, Northeast Missouri used to be Democratic and now it's Republican. If that's all that I am, then I'm a pretty one-dimensional person and a one-dimensional reporter. And I fully admit that sometimes I get on that tangent a lot, and it's kind of one of the reasons I like interviewing former electeds, because I do think that going back in time does provide some perspective for now. But I also just have been grateful that, since I started off in 2006, 2007, 2008, I was able to keep going through some ups and downs to cover a lot of other really important political events, but also ones that are kind of forgotten. Like I covered the 2010 and 2012 election cycle, which I don't think a lot of people talk about.
People forget that Robin Carnahan was the favorite in that race.
Yeah,
like she got in there, and we thought, and I think a lot of people thought, that Missouri was going to have 2 Democratic women to be U.S. senators. I mean, that was, and she ended up obviously, just the wave just overcame her, and she was blown out. But she was the favorite when she got in that race.
But even 2012 was really important because, like, when people talk about Jason Kander on a national perspective, all they talk about is how he almost won a U.S. Senate race and didn't do anything else. When I really think that sells him short in the sense that he ran in 2012 against a very, very good Republican opponent in Shane Scholler, who I think, besides Peter Kinder, was probably the best candidate of that cycle, and he was able to win as a non-incumbent. And knowing that, I mean, I can say that, and Jason Kander will probably hear that and be like, oh, thanks a lot for saying all these nice things about me. But it also just provides context of why I think he's a pretty substantial political figure. He's more than just like one viral ad, in a sense, and that's why I think he's still a significant presence, even though I don't see him coming back into electoral politics.
I have told him this, so I'm not saying anything to him that I wouldn't. I've told him, jokingly, but kind of seriously, that in a lot of ways, I think he's the worst thing that's ever happened to Missouri Democrats.
Oh yeah,
because everybody. Not everybody, but so many people saw the end of his career and thought that's where he started. Mm-hmm. Not end of his career, but the end of the 2016 campaign, and thought that's where he started, mm-hmm. and didn't understand the 8 years of grueling work that, more than that even with Heartland Dems, but like being in the House for 4 years, being Secretary of State for 4 years, the stuff that he put into it. I think a lot of people don't understand the background.
I think that people appreciate the context. Like I knew Chris Koster for a long time, so I knew a lot of the things that he believed in 2007 and 2008. I'm not sure he was super happy. I kept saying that he was against campaign donation limits, and then he changed his view on that. Or I think he may have been happy. I was like, wow, he's a lot more conservative than most Democrats, because that was probably helping his case in a conservative state. But I knew a lot of that context because I was there when he was in the Senate. And I know like a lot of like Medicaid expansion now because I was there when Democrats were trying to reverse that in the mid-2000s.
Yeah. It was the major issue against attacking Matt Blunt back when he was governor. So that was 2004, 2008.
And I do think it's important to put things in perspective that Matt Blunt was probably the most controversial figure in Missouri politics when he was there, and it was primarily based off his policy decisions and his issue positions. I don't think that people disliked Matt Blunt because they disliked him as a person. And I think like one of the biggest changes I've seen in Missouri politics since I started is it's really gone away from people being really for somebody or really against somebody because of what they believed in. And it's more been about their personalities. And maybe you have some perspective on this too, because I think a lot of Missouri politics has become very personality driven, and with some exceptions has been less about issues. Like, what do you think about that?
Well, I think, we've had some pretty bad personalities in Missouri politics, to be honest. So sometimes that's warranted, right? Like in the case of Eric Greitens, where I think he, in my opinion, I think he's just a bad human being. I think you're going to see some more of that as Missouri has become a red state. Republicans have less to differentiate themselves from each other. And so you're going to see politics turn. They have to be more personal with each other because they can't. It's hard to separate themselves on issues.
We'll be right back after this quick break with more Politically Speaking with Stephen Webber.
The Gateway brings you the day's news each weekday from around the St. Louis region and the state capitals in Jefferson City.
Our schools are accredited. We don't need this bill.
And Springfield.
How many more years must pass before lawmakers see time is of the essence?
I'm Abby Larico. Join me each weekday for The Gateway on the STLPR app or wherever you get podcasts.
And now Stephen Webber and I return to our conversation on Politically Speaking.
as you've literally grown up,
Mm-hmm.
I mean that term specifically, how has that changed the way that you cover Missouri politics? In the sense of when you first got in, you were a college intern, you were a single guy.
Mm-hmm.
Now you've got a family, you've got wife, kid, house, all of that other stuff. How has that changed the way, both in terms of physically you're able to cover in terms of travel and all that, and also just the approach you take to issues affect you in a different way now than they did when you were 22, 23?
When you do this for as long as I have, I don't want to say you don't get passionate about things. Like, I can't say that I went through covering Ferguson and didn't come out the other side being really passionate about the fact that there is a lot of instilled racism in this country, and that white people like me have a lot to do with it and have a lot of work to do to fix it. I don't think that you go through situations where you see people that die, like Tom Schweik, or even people that just pass away naturally, like Ron Casey, for example, who I think you served with, who was just a truly tremendous human being who passed away, or Ed Robb, like when he died. Like you become like a lot. It does emotionally affect you. So I think that you do try to take issues a little bit more dispassionately, because you kind of are more emotionally mature to know that's your job, but things sort of affect you more because your life experience dictates it.
I'm gonna this might be a leading question, but have you been surprised at how quickly Schweik has been erased from the Missouri political memory?
Yes. But
that seemed to me like a moment that was going to stick with people, and I certainly don't mean any. I know his friends and family, obviously, it's stuck with. But as the larger political body, the political ecosystem, I think that the honest thing to say is it hasn't had any long-term impact or resonated.
Number one, that was a really hard thing for me because my grandpa died 3 or 4 days after he died. Mm-hmm. It was also really hard because the whole conversation became revolved around Judaism. I am Jewish. So I kind of felt like I wanted to say a lot more during that. Even now, I probably want to say a lot more about that, but I'm kind of muted because I can't really be unbiased about that. I really wish that conversation had been more about mental health, because I think when I did my podcast with Candor, I also have said that I've gone through my own mental health issues. I've been seeing a therapist since 2016. I really wish the conversation had been about that. And I know that people were trying to steer it in that direction to maybe take the heat off of certain people, but I really was disappointed that it became a conversation about anti-Semitism in Missouri politics and less about like how can we do more about mental health in Missouri politics. And that's why I was really gratified that Candor did what he did, because I really think that he restarted that conversation in a very meaningful way.
Well, and going back to what we said earlier about it being politics becoming more personal, I wish it had maybe changed some of the way that we talk about and to each other, which has not improved in any way.
We were talking about how that was going to change how the discourse was in Missouri politics, and I think the discourse has never been worse now. It has never been worse than it has, and it's going to get even worse in this zany U.S. Senate race that I'm sure is going to be very entertaining to cover. I think you got to be careful about saying like things were better back then, but I do think the discourse now is a lot more personalized, and I don't think it's better than it was back in the 2000s.
So not in the short term, like not specifically about the 2022 primaries or anything like that, but it's sort of in the medium term, over the next 4, 6, 8 years. What are some questions that you're curious to see how they play out, that you have about Missouri politics that you're interested to see where they go?
I want to see if the Missouri Democrats can be a relevant party. I think that they're a relevant party where I am in St. Louis because they control most of local politics there. But right now, they are not a relevant party statewide. And I know that is a blunt assessment, but
it's an accurate one.
It's an accurate one.
Yeah.
We're going to go through redistricting in the fall, and I'm saying openly, like, Democrats are going to be complete non-factors in redistricting. That was not the case in 2011, as you found out yourself, like, because you had a Democratic governor, that process was a lot harder for Republicans to do what they did. I'm interested to see that because politics is not a straight line. It eventually comes back eventually. And I'm sure that Democrats in, the 80s thought that they were going to be in power forever, and they weren't. But I don't think that that's going to happen anytime in the near future. What do you think about that?
Well, first, I've as a Democrat, people have been saying that to me for my whole political career. I remember after 2010, we lost 17 seats in one night, and afterwards, everybody's response is, "Look, we have to pick up seats in 2012. These things just come back. That was an aberration, and we lost more seats in 2012."
Right.
So, I have heard that we've hit bottom a lot of times, and it always has gotten worse. So, I'm cautious of that. And I also say that back in the 80s, while Dems had, at some point supermajorities even and massive legislative majorities, Republicans routinely won statewide offices. Yeah. All right, so that was when obviously Kit Bond and Danforth and Ashcroft. I mean, it's not an apples to apples comparison of today. I do think that but I've been telling people in sort of Democratic circles is the Democratic Party has a choice to make. Are we going to be a regional party or are we going to be a statewide party? And the danger of being a regional party is that we've seen the Republican legislature will reach into the cities and they'll take away local control. And eventually they'll give enough time, they'll basically be running St. Louis and Kansas City from Jeff City.
But there's another reason. I think this is the second thing I want to look for. I want to see if rural Missouri as a society and as an economy and as a place can recover. I'm very passionate, for example, about, again, what happened after Michael Brown's shooting death when it comes to race. But I'm also really passionate about talking about how rural Missouri deserves to thrive and be in a place that is similar to urban Missouri. And right now, that is not the case. Like, if you travel around rural Missouri, you will see just some of the worst poverty that you will ever see. You will see shells of former cities that used to be great cities. And there's really not a good solution to turning it around. I think people want magic solutions to try to make a place like Doniphan, Missouri, or Charleston, Missouri, into the heydays they were in the 50s and 60s. And it's a lot more complex than just wishing it away. It involves diversifying the economy. It involves fixing the education system there. It involves making sure that people there that are poor have some sort of ability to get health care. You traveled a lot around rural Missouri yourself. Do you have the same perceptions that I do, or do you see it a little bit less negatively?
I mean, I think I see life there a little bit less negatively, but I would say I agree with your larger point that if you go to North City, St. Louis, and see abandoned buildings, and you go to Bunston in Cooper County and see abandoned buildings, they look very, very similar, and a lot of the challenges they face are similar. And I think the Democratic Party is doing the right thing in terms of concentrating on Ferguson and areas that have not been invested in the past, but needs to absolutely reject the idea that anybody cut rural Missouri loose, or that we stop showing up in rural Missouri. And it's tough. I mean, rural Missouri by definition, right, is spread out, and it takes a lot of time and a lot of investment. And I've seen a lot of Democrats say that it's not worth doing that, and I strongly disagree with that for both political reasons and for human reasons. Like you said, there's millions of people live there.
And I also I said two things, but I'm going to add a third thing. I want to see how Missouri's black political community continues to evolve and continues to harness power. I think one of the untold stories about kind of the collapse of the Missouri Democratic Party is you're really starting to see black political figures take a less supplementary role and more of an active role in leading the party. And I think that kind of is in the Bill Clay Sr. tradition of no longer being part of a white political party's coalition, because I've talked to you before. I know you're not a huge fan of Lacey Clay, but I
have been cussed out by Lacey Clay multiple times.
But but if you read a lot about what his dad did, it is truly revolutionary in terms of not only St. Louis politics but also Missouri politics, in the way that he took command of a political organization himself and made white interests subservient to him. I think that was something that had never been seen in Missouri politics before. And I think you're kind of seeing that a little bit on a statewide level, but you're going to continue to see the tensions between white and black Democrats, because I think that they have different goals and they have different opinions on issues, and I think that they have different ways of going about creating coalitions that win elections. And I think it's a genuinely fascinating story. I think it's a heartening story in the sense that there's a long history of racism in Missouri that has held a lot of black people back on more than just a political standpoint. It'll be interesting to see if they can move into a statewide perspective, and eventually maybe, I don't know if it'll be the Republicans that do this first or maybe the Democrats, have somebody who's not white be a statewide official. I'll be interested to see if that ever happens.
Yeah, and I think also just the changes in the leadership in the black community, right? Like, it's been obviously in St. Louis. Cori Bush's victory was just, I think, earth-shaking in terms of changing the
I said it
order.
was like one of the biggest. I think that was like one of the biggest moments in St. Louis political history in the last 50 or 60 years, and I think that that's accurate. I mean, the end of the Clay era is a very big deal, and I think that it's going to be really fascinating to see how she continues on through her political journey.
What's a story that you know exactly where you were when it broke? When you heard about it, you're like, I was there. I remember that story breaking.
So I'll tell you where I was when I heard Michael Brown was killed. I was actually at when he was killed, I was actually at a party with a lot of my oldest son's daycare friends. Interestingly, I was actually with a Ferguson resident who was a St. Louis police officer and his family. That was when it happened. I didn't find out about it right away. I was actually sitting on my couch watching a YouTube documentary of Harold Washington, who was the first black mayor of Chicago, who I had heard about, but I'd never really known a lot about. So I watched that entire documentary and then went on Facebook and saw a post on then State Representative Michael Butler's Facebook page, which had Michael Brown's body in the street. I will never forget that sequence of events because that story fundamentally changed my life. It changed the trajectory of my reporting career. I think it was probably one of the most complex and important global issue stories that I think anybody in St. Louis has covered in the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years. I think that the issues around the relationship between black people and police is still ongoing.
What's your favorite thing about Missouri politics?
My favorite thing is getting to meet the people. Not just the electeds, but also just the people around Missouri politics, and also the people who are kind of ordinary people that like Missouri politics. I really like covering the policy issues. I've loved meeting so many people, and I just have really been honored over these last 15 years to be able to tell the story of Missouri politics, the ups and downs, and the big moments.
So what do you think the future of Missouri political journalism looks like? How's it going to evolve? You were in 2008, you came in, or 2006 you came in, but you had the blog.
Yeah.
Now you switched over, you've been doing podcasts. Twitter obviously is huge now. What's the evolution of newspapers? The ownership structure is completely different than it was when you first came in. What direction is this going, and how is it going to change?
I don't see newspapers having much of a future. That doesn't mean print won't have a future. And I think the Post-Dispatch and the Star and the Tribune will exist, but they will be primarily digital-centric entities in the next 5 or 10 years. I think the idea that we have to salvage the, printing words on a piece of paper and then disseminating it that way, I understand people have a lot of nostalgia for it. I have a lot of nostalgia for it. I only wanted to be a newspaper reporter when I was younger, but I don't think that's the future. I think the future is in digital. I think we're going to see more and more digital outlets continue to surpass newspapers. We talked about on the McCaskill podcast about how a lot of outlets have less resources, so it really provides a void for overtly partisan outlets to fill that void.
Right.
And I don't think that that's good either way. Like, I was never a true believer that, like, it was good for there to be an MSNBC or a Fox News that are slanted one way or the other. I'm not saying CNN is great. Like, CNN has kind of gone in the MSNBC direction. But I do think that there's some value in having news outlets that are not obviously partisan. And I think you're going to see more of those outlets become more prominent because they're easy to pump money into. It's a lot harder to convince people to provide money for traditional news outlets. I only have one question for you because I feel like this conversation has gone in a good organic direction. Where do you see the future of Missouri political journalism in the views of a former stakeholder, in the sense you were a former elected official, and now you're kind of still in the game, but you're not really a principal anymore. You're kind of a behind-the-scenes person. Like, are you more optimistic about the future of Missouri political journalism than me or Senator McCaskill is, or do you think it's going to be going in a bad direction?
I think it's going in a bad direction, and it's an issue that I think nationally, a lot about. I was at the gym the other day, and I was talking to a guy. He was a good guy. We just started talking about politics. Seems fairly reasonable, and just out of nowhere, he said he was really upset that Joe Biden boycotted Memorial Day. Mm-hmm. Which, of course, Joe Biden did not boycott Memorial Day, and there's evidence of him laying wreaths, and that's not the case. But and I let him know that, and he was surprised. He had seen an article that said that, and he believed it. And he's an adjunct professor, and so I don't really know what to do with that in terms of the future. I think that for a long time, when I first got in, you were very, very nervous about how the press was going to portray a campaign. And then it got to a point where it was really almost more just what the headline read. And now there's different outlets where people are making up their own headlines and their own articles. And, the fact checkers can't keep up, and people have stopped believing the fact checkers and sort of even the idea of fact checking. And so I don't really know where this goes, but I have been more pessimistic than most, I think, about social media and the human mind's ability to exist in a world with social media. I just don't think we're prepared for it. And I struggle with what role does the media play? It seems like a lot of times there's things that we only know about because reporters do put in long work to discover it. And sometimes that matters, and sometimes you think it should, and it just doesn't. And that's a tough place to be as a society. All right, well, Jason, I appreciate your time. Thank you for subjecting yourself to being a guest on your over 500th episode of Politically Speaking.
With a guest. We've gone over 500 episodes many years ago.
Okay.
That shows how. So I am going to take back the microphone because I got to say that Politically Speaking is a product of St. Louis Public Radio, which is part of the University of Missouri St. Louis. You can find all of our stories at stlpr.org. Follow me on Twitter at @Rosenbaum. I guess your Twitter is S_Webber, and you found the password for that 5, 6, 7 years ago, and you're now going viral every day now.
After I got out of elected office, Abe Rako finally gave me back my password, and now I can tweet.
All right. Until next time, so long.